Good day, everyone. My name is Angelica Filasol. Today, my group, the Group 4, will discuss about the consumer choice and utility maximization. When we say consumer choice, it is about the people, us, consumer, who decides what to spend on our money based on our preferences and budget constraints. And when we say utility maximization, it is the concept that individuals and organizations seeks to attain the highest level of satisfaction from our economic decisions. This shows how we consumer decide to allocate our income.
Good day everyone, my name is Ivan Russell Igay and today we are discussing about consumer choice and utility maximization. After discussing and understanding this chapter, you should be able to define products and services and describe a consumer. Distinguish between consumer taste and consumer preference. Display Maslow hierarchy of needs. Explain the economic of satisfaction. Define consumer surplus and marginal rate of substitution. And explain the budget. You should also describe the significance of utility.
In many respects, we as customers are unique. We all have various wants, requirements, and demand. We differ in our preferences and dislikes, attitude, lifestyle, and so on. However, our consumer behavior is difficult to detect and quantify. Given our limited financial resources, our economic goal as a consumer is to maximize our satisfaction or income. With this in mind, economics aim to explain why consumers behave in a specific way. This chapter, we will learn how we as consumers behave in order to optimize our pleasure with the goods and the services we consume given our restricted income. Let's start with the consumer. Before we begin our discussion of consumer behavior, let us define who a consumer is. A consumer is someone who demands and consumes goods and services. There is no need for firm-made product if consumption does not exist. In a capitalist or free market economy, the consumer is king. Products for their own benefits must satisfy the requirements of desire of consumer in order to prosper. In this sense, we are all consumers since we want the things and services from minute we wake up in the morning until we retire to our beds at night. Because we are the ultimate purchaser of goods and services, we have the capacity to select or even control what is produced. This is known as a consumer sovereignty. In general, if we as a consumer demand more of goods and services, we will receive more of it. Producers just follow the requests of the desire of a consumer as well as their requirements and desires. Now let's proceed to the consumer behavior. Consumer behavior is a study of how items are used and discarded, as well as how they are purchased. Consumer behavior is defined as the study of individuals or group and the process they use to select, secure, and dispose of items and services. This section discusses how these individual or groups deal with what they buy, where they buy goods and services, and how they buy and how much they buy, when and why they buy. It is critical to research consumer and how they behave in order to assist businesses in maintaining and improving their operation and production. Understanding consumer would allow them to provide better goods and services, which would assist generate better economic condition of a consumer. Goods and services. Before we proceed any further, it is also necessary to define products and services. Goods are defined as everything that satisfies a consumer's necessity, wants, and desires. They can be tangled economic products such as automobiles, books, clothing, mobile phones, and so on. and that contributes directly or indirectly to the satisfying of human needs and desire. In contrast, services are intangible economic activities such as hairdressing, catering, insurance, banking, telecommunication, and so on. And it also contribute directly or indirectly to the gratification of a human desire. Tangible products can be categorized in variety of ways, including but not limited to consumer goods, essential or necessity goods versus the luxury goods, and the economic and free good. The first is a consumer goods. These are things that provide direct satisfaction to any customer. These goods are primarily sold for consumer use and are not intended to be utilized for further processing or as an input of a raw material in the production of another goods. These are typically the things that are easily accessible to the consumer. For example, soft drinks, bread, crackers, cellular phone loads, clothing, and so on. And the next is essential or necessity goods versus luxury goods. We defined necessity goods and luxury goods in the context of elasticity in the previous chapter. As we study consumers' behavior, is important to review that these goods are essential or necessary products are or necessary products that meets the man's basic necessities. In other words, these are items that we require in our daily lives as a human. For example, it is food, water, house, clothing, electricity, medicine, and other necessities are also included. Luxury items, on the other hand, are those the humans that can live without but are utilized to improve their comfort and well-being. Some of them are private jets, yachts, luxury automobiles, perfume, jewelries, and other items are example of luxury goods. Next is economic and free good. An economic good is anything that is both beneficial and limited in supply. It has monetary worth and must be paid for in order to be used. If a good is a plentiful, that there is enough of it, and everyone requirements without anyone having to pay for it, that good is free. Water from our faucet is an economic good because we do not get it free and we must pay it from the distributor. Free things includes the air that we breathe and sunlight we receive from the sun.
Taste and preferences are determined by age, income, education, gender, occupation, customs, and traditions, as well as culture. Preferences are the choices made as consumers as to which products or services to consume. Then brands, name, terms, or symbol, a focal point of product differentiation between suppliers. We as consumers also express preferences as to which particular brand of a product to purchase, even in the choice of food, clothing, and shelter. For instance, we differ in our choices and preferences. Some prefer bread than rice, or like fish and vegetables than meat. Fact, we can generalize that no two consumers have exactly the same likes and dislikes. Maslow's hierarchy of needs identifies the basic priorities of every consumer. Maslow saw human needs in the form of a hierarchy, ascending from the lowest to the highest. He concluded that when one set of needs is satisfied, this kind of need ceases. Okay, we have self-actualization needs. These needs explain the worth of a person's self-development. growth and realization and achievement. According to Maslow, this is the highest need in the hierarchy. Then, STEM needs. These needs explain the importance of self-esteem, recognition, status of an individual, and the general acceptance of the society to an individual. This kind of need produces such satisfaction as power, prestige, status, and self-confidence. Then, social needs. These needs cover the value of the sense of belongingness, love, care, acceptance, and understanding of family, relatives, and friends, and to be accepted by others. Then, safety needs. These are the needs to be free or of physical danger and the fear of losing one's work, property, food, or shelter. Then, physiological needs, the basic needs for sustaining human life, such as food, water, warmth, shelter, sex, and sleep.
The economics of satisfaction. So, how did economics explain the consumer behavior in order to attain the maximum level of satisfaction in the goods and services that they consume? So, in this section, we're going to explain how the consumer attained the maximum satisfaction level on the many goods and services available for their consumption. But we have to remember that every consumer has different preferences on attaining their satisfaction to the highest level. So every one of us has different likes and dislikes. In this section, there will be theories that economists devise to explain how consumers are able to attain maximum level of satisfaction when consuming a particular good or services. The first is utility theory. In economics, it refers to the satisfaction or pleasure that an individual or consumer gets from the consumption of a good or services that he or she purchased. For purposes of economic analysis, utility is also measured by how much a consumer is willing to pay for a particular goods or services. That means that utility is the satisfaction or pleasure of a consumer. So whatever the price of a certain products or services, as long as the consumer satisfied, then he or she will buy the products or services. As you can see in the table, it presents a hypothetical demand schedule for Chopin. So the quantity demand is how much the consumer consumes, while the price represents the utility or the satisfaction of the consumer. You will notice that in the table that the amount of money that you're willing to pay for an additional unit of Chopin declines. What is the reason for this? As you may have experienced, the more Chopin you eat, the more you became satiated. So you're not willing to spend more for the next Chopin you wish to continue. It simply tries to explain how our satisfaction or utility as consumers decline when we try to consume more and more of the same good at a particular point in time. There are two important concepts that should be explained before we fully understand the utility theory. These are the marginal utility and the total utility. The marginal utility is defined as the additional satisfaction that an individual derives from consuming an extra unit of a good or service. Marginal means additional or extra. In other words, the marginal utility is the added satisfaction that a consumer gets from having a more units of goods or services. Total utility is the total satisfaction that a consumer derives from the consumption of a given quantity of a good or services, in particular period in time. Total utility depends on the quantity of a good consumed. More consumption generally gives more utility. Hence, our total utility usually increases as we consume more and more of a good or service. But generally, the increase is at a slower or declining rate. This implies that each extra unit consumed adds less and less marginal utility than the previous units consumed as we become more satiated with the good or services we are consuming. Take a look at the hypothetical utility schedule table. Assume that at the end of the class, you are too hungry that you went directly to the cafeteria. In the cafeteria, you bought and consumed one siopaw for your merienda. In this case, your total and marginal utilities are 40. Assume further that you consumed another siopaw because you are too hungry after the class. Your total utility now increases to 90, so that the marginal utility increases by 50. Let us now assume that you have consumed 5 siopaw. Take note that in the table, your total utility for the fifth unit is 350 utilities. However, what is more important is the marginal utility. As you can see, the marginal utility has declined by 80. Why is that? Because of the law of diminishing marginal utility. So what is law of diminishing marginal utility? It is stated that as a consumer gets more satisfaction, in the long run he or she experiences a decline in his or her satisfaction for goods and services. This means that the more we consume goods or services, the more we get a less marginal utility or an extra satisfaction or utilities. Here is the mathematical derivation of marginal utility. This is how we get the marginal utility or the added or extra satisfaction or utility of a consumer. Here is a formula. MU or the marginal utility equals delta TU or total utility divided by delta Q or quantity consumed, where MU equals TU sub 2 minus TU sub 1 divided by Q sub 2 minus Q sub 1. The TU sub 2 is the new total utility and the TU sub 1 is the original utility, while the Q sub 2 is the new quantity consumed and the Q sub 1 is the original quantity consumed. Here's an example on how we get the marginal utility. Using the formula, we can derive the marginal utility for the total utility presented in the table. So our MU equals TU sub 2 minus TU sub 1 over Q sub 2 minus Q sub 1. So our new total utility would be 170 minus our original utility is the 90 divided by the new quantity consumed, which is the 3, minus on the original quantity consumed, which is the 2, equals 170 minus 90 equals 80, and 3 minus 2 equals 1. 80 divided 1 equals 80. So our marginal utility is 80, and we got it right. According to the table, in the unit purchase number 3, the marginal utility is 80, and when we use the formula, we got the answer of 80. So, it is how we use the formula in getting the marginal utility. Here's a graphical illustration of the total utility and marginal utility. As I have said a while ago, the more we consume a good or services, the more our utility increases, but at a decreasing or declining rate. Here's the 4.1, which is the total utility curve. As we may have observed, our total utility curve is a concave. We can see from the curve as indicated by the dashed lines that the initial consumption of 1 unit of the quantity consumed going to 2 unit has a larger angle than the next consumption. We can therefore imply that the consumption from unit 1 to 2 units has a total of 10 utilities, or an incremental increase of 5 utilities, or satisfaction, while for the next consumption is only increased to 11 utilities or satisfaction, or only an additional 1 utility. Here is also the marginal utility curve, figure 4.2. The illustration has a convex curve. This is because the marginal utility starts at a high level, but as consumption of the same good increases, marginal utility declines. Like I've said, the more that you consume a goods or services, the more that it added a marginal utility, but it also declines because we are already satisfied of what we have consumed. When do we stop consuming a goods or services? That's when maximizing total utility came. We are given the opportunity to maximize our satisfaction by continuously consuming more units of a certain good until our satisfaction falls down to zero. When we reach the peak of our satisfaction, that's when the marginal utility falls down to zero. Here's the utility maximization rule. First is to allocate the entire available budget. It is to maximize the total utility. Second is to make the marginal utility per peso spent the same for all goods. It means that we have to spend our satisfaction in the same goods or services. Consumer surplus. It is a measure of a welfare we gain from the consumption of goods or services, or a measure of the benefits that we derive from the exchange of goods. Consumer surplus is about the difference between the total amount of a goods or service that we are willing to pay or buy and the total amount of what we really pay or buy on a specific goods or services. For example, suppose you're interested in buying a new pair of maong pants. So you went to the mall and looked for a pants that you really wanted. Your budget for the pants is 3,000. When you went to the boutique, you found out that the pants you like only cost for 2,500, and immediately you bought the pants. So where is the consumer surplus? Like I've said, consumer surplus is about the difference between the total amount that you are willing to pay and the total amount of what you have to pay. Thus, the 3,000 is the total amount of you're willing to pay for the pants, while the 2,500 is the actual expense or the actual total amount that you have to pay. That means our consumer surplus is the 500. Here's figure 4.3, the consumer surplus graph. As you can see, the 3,000 is the total amount that you're willing to pay, and the 2,500 is the actual amount that you have to pay. And our consumers surplus here is in the between of the 3,000 and the 2,500, which is the 500 pesos. Indifference curve. This is the another concept of a consumer behavior. It is a line that shows combinations of goods among which a consumer is indifferent. To fully understand what is the indifference curve, here's a table 4.3, a hypothetical combination of two goods, meat and fish, each with corresponding prices that will give equal satisfaction to the consumer. Hence, consumer A, for instance, can choose any combination of meat and fish, such as a combination A, where he can consume 5 kilos of meat priced at 500 and a kilo of fish at 100 pesos. Or he can choose combination C, wherein he can consume 3 kilos of meat at 300 pesos and 3 kilos of fish also priced at 300 pesos. In any of the combination of meat and fish, consumer A will get the same satisfaction. Thus, he will be indifferent to any combination. This is because each combination will give him equal satisfaction, given his limited budget of 600. Since all the combination gives the same amount of satisfaction, the consumer prefers them equally. Hence, it is called indifference curve. Take a look at figure 4.4, the indifference curve. Consumer A consumes 4 hamburgers and 2 pizza at point A. However, he is indifferent to all the points on his indifference curve. Moreover, he prefers any point above his difference, which is the B, and any point on it does not prefer, which is the C. We can therefore say that consumer A is just happiest consuming 4 hamburgers and 2 pizzas, as to assume the combination of hamburger and pizza at any other point along the same difference curve. This means that consumer A prefers all the combination of hamburgers and pizza of letter B. That means our indifference curve is the letter C, which the consumer did not like or prefer the letter C. The indifference curve map. It shows the indifferent curves in the same diagram. Take a look at figure 4.5, the indifference curve map. As the curve moves further to the right, the level of utility becomes higher. The shape of the indifference curve is not a straight line, but a convex, and the indifference curves will never cross. This is due to the concept of diminishing marginal rate of substitution between the two goods. The marginal rate of substitution will be reported by Ms. Felicia.
Good day everyone, I am Melissa Felicia and I will be the last reporter of Group 4. Marginal rate of substitution is the slope of the curve and measures the rate at which the consumer would be willing to give up one good for the other while maintaining the same level of utility. It reflects the ratio of marginal utilities between the two goods. The formula of the marginal rate of substitution is MRS equals to change in good X over change in good Y. Since it is MRS over marginal utility X over marginal utility Y. As what I've said, marginal rate of substitution is the willingness of a consumer to replace one good for another as long as the new good is equally satisfying. For example, if a consumer is willing to give up 6 bananas in exchange for 3 apples, the MRS is equal to negative 6 over 3 equals to negative 3. Why? Since the equation contains the amount that is willing to be given up, which is the negative 6 in the numerator, and the amount to be gained, which is the positive, which is the 3, is the denominator, the result is always negative, which is the negative 3. Budget or consumption possibility line. It shows the various combination of two products that can be purchased by the consumer with his income given the price of the products. When we look at the table 4.4, which is the hypothetical table for budget line, the table shows the budget given for various combinations of the consumption of beans and onions with corresponding prices given the various combinations. Each combination equals the budget of 150 pesos, which will eventually provide equal satisfaction to the consumer. As we can see in Unit A and Unit B, which is the Unit A's beans in kilogram, the price is 125, and in Unit B, which is the onions in kilogram, in 1 kilo, there is 25. So, the budget for it is 150. At kahit magkabaliktad man or yung onion mababawasan at yung beans is madadagdagan, ang budget talaga niya is 150. Hindi na yan increase pa ang budget. Kung ano yung budget, dun lang talaga dapat. Also, when we look at in figure 5.6, which is the budget line, the figure shows the budget line for the consumption of two commodities, beans and onions. As you can see, there are 5 possible combinations of prices on two goods, which is the 125 and 25, 100 to 50, 75 and 75, and 50 over 100, and 25 and 125, which are all equal to the budget of 150. As what I've said, kung ano yung budget, yun lang talaga. Kung ikaw yung buyer, nasa sayo na kung babawasan mo ba yung onions at dadagdagan mo yung beans, as long as it equals to 150, which is the budget price.
Purpose of a budget. The purpose of a budget is to not spend more than what you have. It tracks the incoming and outgoing monies. Individuals, households, businesses, and even government use budgets so that they have at least a small amount of money left at the end of the month. Next, budget constraint. The budget constraint indicates the combinations of the two goods that can be purchased given by the consumer's income and prices. The intercept points of the budget constraint are computed by dividing the income by the price of the good. So, for example, if the consumer has 100 pesos to spend and the price of burger is 20 and pizza is 10 pesos, we can compute that the consumer can buy 5 burgers, 100 divided 20 is equals to 5, or 10 pizzas, 100 divided 10 is equals to 10. Any combination of the two goods that is on or beneath the budget constraint becomes affordable, while those to the outside, farther from the origin, now become unaffordable.
Change in consumer income. If the income of the consumer increases, the consumer has the ability to buy more or higher combination of goods. This will cause the budget line to shift to the right. Conversely, if there is an increase in income, budget line will shift to the left. As we can see in figure 0.47, which is the budget line shift, if consumer income increases, then there would be a corresponding parallel shift to the right to represent a fall in the potential combinations of the two goods that can be purchased. In our example, when income increases from 1,000 to 2,000 pesos, the consumer budget constraint shifts from point A to point B. Figure 4.8, which is the maximizing utility given budget constraint, this figure shows the point where the indifference curve touches or is tangent to the budget line. The optimum consumption is point C on the second indifference curve with a given utility to equal to 90. In income and substitution effect, indifference curves and budget constraints can be helpful in order for us to understand the income and substitution effects more clearly. Indifference analysis can be used to analyze how a consumer would change the combination of two goods for a given change in their income or the price of the good. Let's say that a consumer has an income of 100 pesos and the price of the apple is 5 and the price of orange is 10. Given the prices of these goods, the consumer can buy total of 12 apples and 4 oranges for his or her particular budget. When the price of orange decreases from 10 pesos to 6 pesos, the consumer will increase the number of orange up for purchase and he will now buy 5 oranges given his allocated for the orange. Kung ang price ay increase, the quantity demand bababa. Kung ang price bababa naman, yung quantity demand naman ang tataas. Note that in our example, we mention a change in price. This means that a decrease in price will result in an increase in the quantity demand and that an increase in price will result in a fall in the quantity demand. In figure 4.9, which is the income substitution and substitution effect, the movement from point A to point C is the income effect. The additional consumption of oranges due to the increased purchase power. The income effect shows that if the consumer has a limited budget given a price decline, the consumer can purchase higher quantities of the good and vice versa. For substitution effect, consumer will tend to substitute goods which are cheaper than the original preference. Engel curve. It illustrates the relationship between consumer demand and household income, named after Ernest Engel, a German statistician. In 19th century studied the spending patterns of groups of people of different incomes. He noted that as individuals' income changed, the pattern of the consumption expenditure on goods also changes. The change in the pattern of consumption spending, example, the decline in the proportion of income spent on food and other necessities, and increase in the proportion of income spent on luxuries, with the rise in income of families. In income consumption curve shows how consumer responds in the consumption of two goods when there is a change in his or her income. Looking at figure 4.10, when income increases from 100 to 150, the quantity of wet purchase also changed from 10 to 20. Normal goods have a positive slope ICC. This only means that the consumption of both normal goods, which is the banana and mango, increases as the income increases, and conversely decrease when income also decreased. Connecting all the equilibrium points yield the income consumption curve. On the ICC is plotted. This can now be used to derive the relation between the level of income and optimum quantity purchase of each good. The relationship between the income and quantity for an angle. In 4.11, which is the angle curve, the graph in panel B is the derivation of angle curve from the income consumption curve for necessity good. The y-axis on panel becomes the income compared to the good plotted in the y-axis in panel, which shows the ICC.